the robots that I've talked about in today's discussion, they're frankly fairly dumb. They're going to do what we've configured or programmed them to do, but this is only the starting point. So in the not very distant future at all, I think we're going to see these robots frequently looking at other things that are happening within the environment and making recommendations about how the process can be improved.
That is Kevin Stoneham, who spent 23 years at PwC, where he finished his tenure as the Chief Operating Officer of PwC IT Services. Kevin, now an independent consultant, is focusing his practice on robotic process automation, which is computer software that helps automate repetitive tasks, such as taking information from one application and rekeying it into a different application. In this episode, Kevin gives me an overview of how robotic process automation is being used by his clients and how he's developed expertise with these tools. To learn more about Kevin, you can visit his LinkedIn profile, and a link is in the show notes. I hope you'll consider signing up for the weekly Unleashed email. I'll send you the transcript of each episode, book recommendations, and consulting tips. You can visit umbrex.com and click on the Unleashed tab to sign up. Hello, Kevin. Welcome to the show.
Well, it's a real pleasure to be here. I've been a big fan of Unleashed and happy to be on the show.
That's very kind of you to say. So, robotic process automation. It's a phrase I hear a lot these days. You've done a lot in this, and it makes me think of one of these car factories with all these robot machines welding some, sedan, but I understand from you that that's not what robotic process automation is all about. Tell me a little bit, what is robotic process automation? What's that term mean?
Yeah, thanks, Will. So it is a bit of a strange term. It's a mouthful, and it needs a bit of unpacking, because when we do think about robotics, I think of shiny white plastic robots that do cute things, or the machines that you might see on an automotive assembly line that are doing the heavy lifting, the repeatable precision type work. And this robotics process automation area is an emerging area of technology that is doing something a bit different. There are some similarities, however. But maybe even before we go there exactly, let me just take a moment and let's think about the nature of work in the United States today. McKinsey, your alma mater, published a great study around summer of 2016, and they looked at what type of activities are involved in today's occupations. And the type of physical activities that we see on an assembly line or the like, where these traditional robots are in play, that's about 30% of today's occupational work. And obviously a large portion of that can be automated through physical robots. Well, there's another third outside of that that's in the areas that they call data collection and data processing. And so if we think about knowledge workers, they're involved all day long in bringing in data, analyzing it, making decisions, and then furthering the transactions, right?
Sure.
So robotic process automation is really the analogy to the physical world, the physical robot world, taking a look at what's happening on a knowledge worker's computer and giving them a robotic aid to help get that work done. It specializes, as the physical robots do, it specializes in things that are highly standardized, very predictable, they're routine, and they're high frequency. So you can get a lot of value out of a robot. So the robotic process automation concept, an analogy, is a robot sitting alongside you on your computer, and it's been programmed to take on certain transactions. It could also be sitting on a cloud server, for example, and taking on numerous transactions on behalf of an entire company. But the types of things that it can do are very similar to the types of things that a human can do on a computer. It can read, it can click, type, enter information, bring information from one program or application or website to another. So a common example here is an order comes in via web form. It needs to get it inputted into the order processing fulfillment system and then into the accounting system so that we bill for the work. And so that data replication transfer can be done by this robotic process automation concept.
Okay. So let's talk about a few different uses of this, and then we can dive into them in a little bit more detail. So that would be one. So in one case, someone puts an order form in on the web, and I don't know how that would come in on the other side, maybe just as an email or comes into some kind of system as an order. And what you're saying is that the robot would then go and launch something happening in several other programs at that company, into their order entry system, into their accounting system. Can you give some other examples of where you typically think about robotic process automation being used?
Yeah. So the order or the example that I talked about there was the order entry. Let's look at some back office processes.
All
So
right.
finance account reconciliation. We need to look in the financial system, gather a value. We need to look on the bank side, gather other values, do calculations and comparisons. And so that's something that happens on a high frequency, maybe a daily basis within a lot of organizations, maybe across a number of accounts. So that's something that is highly standardized and could be robotized, if you will, through these software robots. Again, you don't see these. It's just software installed, on computers somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
Another example is in human resources. So there's a whole number of steps you need to do to onboard an employee, get them a computer order, to bring on a new email account, get their badge initiated, notify the facilities folks of what day they're going to show up and when they need a workspace and the like. That's another area. When you move outside of the back office, there are a few industry-specific examples. In insurance, for example, you've got claim analysis. There's a lot of data that needs to be gathered. If we're working on a claim for a 1999 Honda Civic, for example, we need to go gather the value of that car and, what does a bumper cost to repair typically. That probably needs to be brought into a central claim file and a report. Those kind of things could be standard routines. The Honda Civic, the year, the bumper piece, those details can be variables, if you will, in the way the robot looks at the work. And as those things change case file to case file, we can just repeat the logic and bring that information back. Another example is compliance reporting. There's a lot of times where you have to look at the activities that are underway in the business and make sure that those are properly reported for internal and sometimes external compliance, type of responsibilities. That might be to an external website, for example, to whatever compliance regulatory agency you have. That's another thing that occurs on a regular basis and can be automated.
Like, what would an example of that kind of just an example of compliance reporting?
Well, I'll give you one example is, and actually this is as I've gotten into this area, I've had an opportunity to automate some things that are relevant for me in my life. So I'm what they call a beneficiary payee for a special needs young adult. Mm-hmm. And so in that case, they have certain benefits through Social Security for their disability, but this individual also works. So we have to report every single month the exact dollars down to the cents of how much they earned in their part-time job, and then that's offset against the benefits that they receive. So we need to look up in that case from the payroll site how much did the individual earn, and then report that into the beneficiary site. That's not something that would necessarily hit the ROI for automation, but that's one example. I think another is I've worked overseas a number of times, and there's a lot of import-export type of compliance responsibilities. So a company may need to report on a monthly basis the total amount of certain types of goods that they've imported, whether that be goods to add value to it and resell ultimately in their own processes, or just goods that they're bringing in to run their business, like buying a laptop or something. So the accounting system may store the information for that compliance reporting. They have to do the report once a month and upload that to the local tax collectors, the import-export authorities website. And so that might be another example.
Okay, great. So I'd love to hear some about how this kind of robots get deployed in an enterprise and the type of project that you might do. So let's maybe walk through a case example, and maybe one place to start would be to say, like, what's the magnitude that you need to be at to sort of start thinking it's going to make sense to use a robot. So, if one person is doing one transaction per month, it probably is, more cost and consulting time than you're saving in the 5 minutes to do it. So like what, sort of what typically would be a threshold do you need to have, is it just one employee spending, 2 hours a month, or do you only start making sense if you have 10 employees who spend half their time doing something? Like, can you give me some sense of scale of when it makes sense to start thinking about it?
Yeah, great question, Will. And I think I tell you, the client scenarios that we like the best is organizations that are on a growth path themselves and are having trouble keeping up with the work with the great people they've already got. So one of the scenarios that we look at is, what is the percentage of work that the individuals are doing that we might be able to recapture that capacity and redeploy that to higher value type activities. Mm-hmm. If you're in the ROI range of, we can recapture a third of a person, but that defers the next hire that you need to make, and you can redeploy that person to help grow the business in terms of the higher value stuff that's coming in the door, then that starts to make sense. Mm-hmm. At the low end, and that's actually one of the things that I really like about this technology, not only its transformative nature in the way that work is done, but it's highly accessible for even a smaller business or a smaller business unit within a larger enterprise. Sort of the upfront investment can be as little as a couple of days of consulting to get the solution up and running and get it configured for a fairly straightforward process, but one that's going to turn, a decent amount of capacity to your workforce. That might be 30% of a person's time, for example. So that initial setup can, like I said, can just be a 2-3 days consulting. And then in terms of the operating costs, it can be as little as $1,000 a month. So annual operating around $12,000 a year. Compare that to, it's really a fraction of what your next hire might be, even down in the administrative range, if you will, in terms of the total cost. And by the way, these robots are working 24 hours a day, 365 days a year, and they don't take coffee breaks or get sick. So, so that's kind of the low end. What we see on the upper end, there are organizations that have deployed thousands of these robots that are automating massive amounts of work. These are not at that kind of scale. It's seldom the type of robot that's on just a person's desk, but it's more robots that are running in the cloud that are serving the entire enterprise. Mm-hmm. And we're seeing those kind of scale implementations in financial services, insurance, banking, and the like.
All right. What are the names of like the main software companies or software platforms that, if I want to look reasonably intelligent and say, oh yeah, I've heard of that. Like, is there just sort of one or two, or are there dozens? Tell me a little bit about the kind of tools that are out there.
There are quite a few. I mean, as we see in emerging technology, there's just a ton of innovation going on. And this is a market and a solution set that's really only been on the market for a few years now. There are three, what I would call, and what the kind of the analyst groups, if you will, the Gartners and Forresters and the like, the three are regularly identified as the market leaders. And those names are UiPath, Blue Prism, and Automation Anywhere. And so among those, most of my focus has been with UiPath. And in fact, my firm DigiServ has recently signed a business partner agreement with UiPath. And I really focused on UiPath because I felt it has a fairly unique position in the market of being very open and accessible. So this scalability that I talk about, from being able to enter this solution space for a company, being able to enter that at the cost level of a fraction of the next assistant you might hire, all the way up to thousands of robots running across a financial services enterprise or a high volume transactional business. They're fairly unique in being able to cover that entire gamut. Okay. And they also do a lot of things to make the solution accessible in the sense of learning it, being able to go to free online training, download the software for free if you want to get your hands on it while you're doing that training, and the like.
Okay. So at the kind of really enterprise scale, like, I don't know if Bank of America or something is doing this, Would they be using one of these kind of systems, or at some point do companies just sort of program it, do it in-house development, or are these three kind of enterprise scale, Fortune 50 kind of solutions?
Yeah, I'm seeing within the Fortune 50, even the Fortune 500, I would say most organizations are experimenting with this at least, using one of those big three. There may be a couple of others in the market that are specialty, if you will, specialty business process or business function oriented, and so there are certainly going to be others in that mix. But I think just about any of the Fortune 500, you would find some activity underway with those big three.
Okay, this is great. So walk me through like a sample engagement. Maybe there's no typical engagement, but a sample engagement to give me a sense of a company maybe senses, they've read about robotic process automation, so they know, hey, we could probably be automating this. We're growing so fast. Instead of hiring more people, we'd like to have, this team member not have to be doing the copying and pasting all day long. So they sense a need and they call someone like you. Like, what would the sort of the process look like? Walk me through from just you getting that call to, they now freed up that person's time and they have the robot, installed and working away.
Yeah, sounds good, Will. And actually, if they're that far along, that's great, because very often the conversations start more on the what is it type of angle. But once we have a general awareness, and we've talked through a few examples of how robotic process automation is making companies more efficient with their work, but also improving the quality of that work process. These robots tend not to make typos. So you see a quality of response time and obviously a resource redeployment opportunity and cost savings associated with that. Then one of the things that we want to do first is look at what is the nature of work within that organization. I mentioned this McKinsey study where we see about a third of the work within the U.S. occupational activity is in data collection, data processing. So we want to talk about what kind of data collection, data processing is happening within that organization, where the highest volumes of it are, and therefore where the opportunities are. And then start to look at that against, again, another metric that came from that McKinsey report is an estimate of about 65 to 70% of that work can be automated using technologies that are available today, like the RPA tools that we've talked about. In the case of the particular company, once we have an understanding of kind of where work is occurring and how much of that is of the data collection and data processing nature, then we want to start to look at a few other attributes to select the initial processes that are candidates for automation. Some of these things are how standardized is the work. Do we always do step ABC, no matter what the nature of the transaction is, or is there an expert in this process that is actually applying a tremendous amount of judgment day to day in how they process each individual transaction? And if it's the latter, if there's a significant amount of judgment that's stored in just one or a few persons' minds, that's probably not something that we want to start with, because we're going to have a high exception rate, and so the robot's going to tend to fail unless we can really deduce that judgment into a automated rule set. But if we find the opportunities where the work is highly standardized, there's a clear initiation of the work. So does an email arrive? Does something get added to a work queue? Does a transaction occur or is sent in, say via a web form or a website or something like that? Then we start to look at as those types of highly standardized, high quality transactions and processes as the earliest candidates.
On a real practical level, Kevin, like, how do you actually do that discovery? Do you typically kind of just sit down one-on-one with a dozen different kind of frontline employees, or do you like to have a big, workshop where, sort of like practically, how do you actually run that discovery session of finding out what processes are happening and how do those processes get kicked off and who's doing it? Because often the head of the group might not know, right? So how do you do that discovery?
Yeah, well, that's a critical point, because a lot of this work really does need to happen with those who are executing the process day to day and really know it inside and out. So the discovery across the enterprise, often what we'll see is there might be a lead sponsor or interested executive that's getting this discussion initiated, and they'll often have an area of work in mind. So we might explore that first. I think a really important component of this early phase is also starting the change management. So executive needs to be talking with their staff, with the employees of the company, about what's happening and about what the intentions are, because there can be a lot of fear related to robotics. And ideally, again, we have this scenario where the capability that we're talking about is going to allow for the company to continue to grow, serve new clients, serve new volumes, enter new markets and the like. But there can be a fear of, all right, maybe there's a few people who aren't going to need to do what they've done in the past, and we want to talk about retraining, redeploying, and the like. As we then expand from that initial phase, that initial domain within the company, then we've got other techniques like a simple form that just about anybody could fill out to recommend a process for consideration, and that form is going to capture things like how many people are doing this, how standardized is it, what is the initiation point to trigger the work, how many steps are involved, if you will, or how many different applications, software programs are involved. And then things like what are the things that, who should be notified when something goes wrong? If the robot encounters an unexpected event or a transaction doesn't complete properly, we want to make sure that somebody's notified of that and they can follow up on it. Mm-hmm. So we have a fairly simple thing, and that's actually one of the most exciting things, is to see an organization approach the initiative, approach the opportunity in such a way that the employees across the board get excited about this potential and they start recommending new things to be automated. And then we have a bit of a filtering and analysis to find out the next great opportunities for automation using that.
Okay. Yeah, I can see that, looking for recommendations. I can imagine in some scenarios there might be something where, rather than kind of relying on ad hoc people recommending something, maybe there's something where you sit down with the whole team and say, okay, let's walk through your whole day. Like, give me kind of a diary of yesterday, write down, tell every single different process that you did, and try to almost get a complete inventory or census of all these different manual processes that are happening.
Yeah, it reminds me of the movie Office Space, when the consultants come in and meet with everybody.
What do you do?
Yes, exactly. Exactly. So, no, but I think I think a lot of it is finding the initial processes that can test the idea, test the ROI, and build the example. Then that creates the opportunity, I think, to bring in the rest of the executive team, the middle management team, and talk about where other opportunities are across the enterprise.
Got it. So let's fast forward a little bit. I'm sorry. So let's say we've done the inventory. Maybe we prioritize. How many times do you do this? How many minutes does it take? Is it standardized? And we sort of filter through and we find the first one that we want to work on. So now talk to me about, how does it actually work to get one of these things automated and have the robot start working? Is it like you kind of programming it, or do you just sort of do the process and the robot follows your actions and then it can replicate it? Or how do you test it and put it in place? And then what if there's variations of things? How does it know? So just walk me through the practical piece of actually implementing the automation on one particular process that you've identified.
Yeah, perfect. And let me kind of start to weave in, one of the real examples that we've worked on. So,
great.
And this is it's a fairly simple one, I think, that everybody will be able to follow along with. So in this case, is a law firm. For every active case that they've got, they receive a number of routine court notices. These could be for hearings that get scheduled or steps within the case management, and that the court administrator is either recording that have occurred or is notifying will occur. So these are things that come out throughout the day from the court administrator. They're often distributed, almost always distributed via email, and as a PDF attachment as a formal court notice. And so as the law firm is receiving all of these notices throughout the day, they need to then file those into the appropriate case file under the client and the actual case matter. And then any of the professionals working on the case, the attorneys, paralegals, and the like, need to be notified that the notice has been received, maybe a few summary attributes about the notice, right? So we may have an administrator in the office that's typically doing this stuff throughout the day. They might be doing some other administrative tasks and the like. So one of the things that we would want to do, of course, as I mentioned before, is make sure that that person that's running the process day to day is involved right from the front and documenting the existing process, how it works today, the as is. And then we're going to look for improvement opportunities that are available in combination with the automation that we'll do. The tool itself, when we talk about the type of RPA tools that we named a few minutes ago, there's a starting point called a recorder. And that's where within the software, and this is kind of the design software, we're going to build the robotic routine. We're going to hit record. We're going to go do a few things on the computer. We're going to come back and press stop, okay? And while we're doing these things, we may be interacting with 5 or 6 different applications, different websites. They could be internal tools to the law firm. They could be external tools that are with the court. They could be like the email program and the like. So as the software records each step, that gets built into a script, if you will. The script actually looks like almost like a Visio diagram of the process as the recorder sees you doing the work. And this is one of the really cool things, that it's not a done product at this point, but it's a starting point. And so it's recorded the different applications that you've used, the sequence, areas that you've typed something in, where you've downloaded an attachment, how you've changed the file name, and where you stored the file in the notices directory of the client file. Okay? So you've got this sort of outline to start with that is the robotic process. And then as we finalize this, that's what the robot will actually be running. But again, we're not ready yet. What we need to do next is go in and sort of clean that up. And we want to look at that point for where are the variables, where are the things that are going to change notice by notice or transaction by transaction. Of course, the case number, the client name, the file name for the attachment, the date, all of those things might be things that are going to change, and we want to recognize those as variables. And that's where these solutions, I would call them low code. You've heard of no code and low code and the like of these different software tools. And so you've got a combination of drag and drop workflow outline that looks very much like a Visio. And then you can drill into each of those steps and manage the variables that are related there. So we're going to have a variable around date. We're going to have a variable about client name and then case number, for example. You sort of polish that up by configuring those variables. And then you have if you will, you have a working prototype of what your robotic automation needs to do. Once you've done that, we want to test that again with the experts, the clients, and make sure that it's actually performing the steps as expected and that the result is good. And then once we've done that, that's the initial.
And how does that testing work? So would you kind of have the robot maybe like step by step through it? So you click next, instead of just whap, it's all done. Let the robot sort of just step through it, maybe one thing at a time, or how does the testing work?
Yeah, so in the ideal case, you're working with, if you will, some dummy data.
Oh, okay.
And so you might have set up a dummy client file, and you're gonna send the inbox, in this case, the email inbox that typically receive these notices. You're going to send it some dummy information with the typical file attachments that it would see. So we can have the robot go step by step, and we will also have a conversation with the client about how each step has been configured and what it's intended to do, and we'll make sure that it works as intended. So we can really drill down granularly into what's happening. We can also look in each case at, again, what happens if something goes wrong. So we don't want the professionals to accidentally wake up one morning and get 500 emails saying this same notice has gone in, right? So we think about let's make sure that this process can't automatically repeat itself in infinite overnight, and the robot's just working all night long redoing the same thing.
Right.
We'll make sure that we have the right checks and balances in place within that, and make sure that the client's happy with the way the routine has been programmed, the way the process has been automated. From there, then we do a little bit more polishing in the background, and this is more what I'd call the kind of the technical code hardening, or just really making sure that it's bulletproof, and that involves other areas of making sure that the routine is ready if, let's say, the browser just crashes midway through, so it has restart capabilities to be able to go and retry a process step. And then we're also going to add additional, failure type routines to make sure that all the right folks are notified if something's going wrong. Once that's done, then you have a final product. We can then begin to put it into what I'd call production, or put it into working on live transactions, and we provide a level of hypercare during that. So, depending on the complexity of the application and how frequently it's running, that hypercare period will handle a good representative number of transactions. So we make sure that it's working properly in the wild. And then if we have a client that's subscribing to our managed service around this, a couple of things that we do once that initial automation piece has been put into place. We go back in a 3 or 6 month increment to do some fine tuning. So often we find that clients need to live with the automation for a little while before they really know a couple of other features that they might like to have it do, or maybe some fine tuning in exactly how the automation is being run. And so we do that as part of our managed services subscription. The other thing that we find, and again, when we talk about an operating cost for an initial robot as a fraction of the next administrative hire, that's the cost for a capacity of a robot that's working 24 hours a day. And it's quite often that the initial process to be automated, it may occur frequently, but let's say it runs every hour on the hour, it may only need to run for 5 or 10 minutes to process that last hour's transaction. So the great thing about that is that operating cost has the capacity quite often to bring on even additional processes without increases to the operating cost.
Okay. I guess, so these individual robots can kind of reach their capacity. I guess I would have thought, I don't know, computers are so fast that you could have one robot doing a lot of different things. But tell me a little bit about that. What is it that sort of chews up the capacity? Yeah,
in fact, they most often are quite faster than the humans. So the example that I talked about in terms of this notice processing, like I said, a lot of them come through a law firm any given day, but they don't take a long time to process, and certainly not if you automate it. So we estimated each one of those might take 3 to 5 minutes for a person to do if they're not interrupted, or if this might be an admin, they may also be covering the phones or something like that. We saw the automated solution do that transaction in 18 seconds. So we saw roughly a 90% reduction in the cycle time per notice or per transaction. Mm-hmm. So in 18 seconds, of course, if you run the thing for 5 minutes even, you can imagine that a typical small to medium firm is going to be able to process every notice that it's received in the last hour. So you've got another 55 minutes of capacity there to do other work. So the things that tend to take a robot, a long time to do are where there's, the same kind of thing where the computer itself is, churning through a tremendous amount of text to do, a text analysis, or it just needs to download a lot of stuff. It's the same kind of things an individual would see its computer do. But often the level of automation and the efficiency of the robot puts it at, very much a positive factor against what an individual would take.
Okay.
So the additional capacity that I described there, the nice thing about that is the initial investment in the robot itself, the roughly $12,000 a year, you can very quickly go and put the second, the third, the fourth process into that robot. It doesn't even have to necessarily be a highly related thing. The robot could finish processing these court notices and then go on to doing legal research for you, and any other processes that we could think about. It could be doing accounts payable or expense management or practice reporting type activities.
Capacity constraint, is it like you sort of pay for one seat or one robot, and then if you need more, you'd pay the UiPath or whichever company, you'd pay for another one or a third one? Is that kind of how it works?
Yeah, that's right. You can. There are a couple of different deployment models. The one that I've been describing is a bit more of the nature where you might install the robot on one paralegal's machine in this particular example, or one person's machine within a company.
Uh-huh.
If you want multiple people to be able to access that, and we can't do it through that initial machine, then you could replicate that. And, you could put it on several people's PCs, and that robot could be available to work alongside them. Once you get to a few of those, however, it probably makes sense to look at what I would call cloud-based robots. So rather than being encumbered by and perhaps constrained by what's happening on an individual's PC, the robot would run on a cloud server and, could be working maybe with a bit more high-powered computing capacity and the like, but can also be, working 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, whether the computers are, whether the things at the office are on or not, and the like. So.
Okay. So tell me a little bit about how complicated these are to do. So let's say you work with a client and help them get the software installed and sort of walk them through the process for several of these processes to be automated. Is this something that requires like a lot of technical training, or just sort of an ordinary, reasonably smart person, if they've been walked through it a few times, would then they be able to take over and automate the other dozen processes that they're doing?
Yeah, that's a great question. And a number of organizations on the larger scale of these deployments have enabled what I would call the citizen developer, the citizen automator. And that's putting the tool set that we talk about into the hands of anybody within the organization that's interested and wants to take that up. In order to get started with it, it's probably about a week of training in what I would call the fundamentals. So it's not necessarily something you're going to do casually after watching a YouTube video for an hour or so. If you want the capabilities across the robotic space, there's a bit of a course that you need to take. And I may have mentioned earlier that's online and it's free, so it's very accessible, but it does require a bit of time. I would not describe it as something that you need to be highly technical for. The individual that understands process and is friendly with technology, but maybe not expert in it, would do fine in this kind of an endeavor. So
you could do some of these without knowing how to, say, program in Python or something, that you could still kind of use the drag and drop type tools to, automate some of the processes at your company.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, that's right. Probably the technical skill set, the analogy that would be best for what I've seen is advanced Excel programming using Visual Basic.
Mm-hmm.
So for somebody that's gone to that length, for example, within the Microsoft Office space, they're going to see a lot of the programming aspects within this, what I call low code environment. So the low code it's most often when let's say you're grabbing a large chunk of text and you want to parse that out to get a particular value, or if you have a data table and you want to be able to sort and filter and make calculations within that data set. Those are the types of areas where you're gonna type a few characters and that's gonna look like code. But a lot of the rest of it is drag, drop, and configure type things in an environment that looks very much like an Excel workflow. Or I'm sorry, a Visio workflow.
Well, a lot of the manufacturing in the U.S. has gone through sort of waves of lean operations, lean manufacturing, Toyota production system type of transformations. And, certainly McKinsey's done a lot of that work. There's a lot of lean practitioners out there. It seems to me from what you're describing that a lot of office work is going to be going through waves of this sort of robotic process automation, because companies that don't are just going to fall behind and get out competed.
I would fully agree with that, Will. And I think, again, there's a tremendous opportunity here to take resource that's really underutilized. In one of my prior roles, I had a team of folks that they were heavily focused on a whole variety of transactions occurring all across the world. And from the leader of that group, I would frequently hear that they were so underwater from just keeping up with the transactions that they really were not able to apply the higher level skill set that they brought to work. And that was being able to analyze, improve, and optimize. And so they're simply doing processing type activities. And so I think this is allowing organizations to, with what's available today, to really look at redeploying assets, human capital assets to higher value activities. And I think we're going to see it continue to grow. The robots that I've talked about in today's discussion, they're frankly fairly dumb. They're going to do what we've configured or programmed them to do. But this is only the starting point. So in the not very distant future at all, I think we're going to see these robots frequently looking at other things that are happening within the environment and making recommendations about how the process can be improved. And, the other forms of what we would call artificial intelligence and machine learning are going to come into play with these technologies. And I think that will continue to work up the stack. When you look at the macro implications of this, I'm more of the glass half full type of view that, as we take out these more mundane routine activities from what the workforce needs to focus on, we're going to find the higher value and more innovative ways to bring our tremendous human capital to bear across the country, across the world, to really do cool stuff from that.
So Kevin, you mentioned earlier that your firm has established a partnership with UiPath, and you're an independent professional. Could you talk about what that means and what that's like? What does it mean that you've established a partnership with them?
Yeah, and it's actually been a pleasure so far to work with UiPath in this regard. So in one part of the partnership, I have access now to sort of the inside track on product development and go-to-market strategies and the like in terms of how UiPath is approaching their market. They have a strong view that in order for clients to be successful, they need a good product like UiPath provides, but they need a good partner ecosystem to help clients understand how to deploy these tools and how to make them successful. So it's a mutually beneficial arrangement where we help the mutual clients of UiPath and DigiServ become successful through these deployments and achieve the benefits that we've been talking about. In terms of the substance of the agreement, in terms of how that works, the business partner agreement that we've recently undertaken gives us the opportunity and the right to resell the product. So if a client wants to buy it directly from us, they can. If they want to buy it from UiPath directly, that's fine too. But even more interestingly, in terms of the way I'm thinking about my business, it offers us the opportunity to deliver robots as a managed service. So this is where we see the on-ramp to RPA for organizations or business units that want to get started in this space, but don't want to make a multi-million-dollar investment without having seen the proof in the pudding, if you will. So the managed services arrangement allows us to offer this robot as a service and bundle the right to use the solution, the licensing, with the initial consulting for deployment and the ongoing support to help make sure the robot continues to run properly.
Great. So a company could come to you and they don't actually have to buy the licenses or whatever internally. They can pay you more of a monthly fee to get it as a cloud service?
Yeah, that's right. We'll bundle in the licensing, the implementation, and the ongoing service and support. And we find that that's a great way for mid to larger size companies or business units to get started, or it's a great way for small to mid-sized firms to achieve the benefits without having to make a huge investment in robotics.
Got it. Okay. And then does like the UiPath would, when they get direct inquiries, do they kind of make those clients sort of give them a list of, well, here's some certified providers that you might want to work with as you implement our solution?
Yeah, that's right. They look at it on a couple of different angles and will make those referrals. Given that my arrangement is so new, I'm just a few weeks in, and a couple of those weeks cross the holidays here. So I've not seen a tremendous amount of that quite yet, but there's, they look at both geographic and also sort of industry sector specialties among their partner group, and will make those recommendations. So looking forward to that opportunity.
And what's the certification process like? Do you have to kind of I imagine you have to demonstrate to them that you're an expert at the software?
Yeah, and they're I mentioned their online training earlier. It's quite innovative. Everything's on the UiPath website, and you start with what they call a foundations course and work your way up to the certified expert level through a number of courses. During that courseware, they mix in the conceptual topic along with hands-on exercises that you do. So at points during the training, you're actually turning in working robotic code or working robot automations, as an assignment to do. As you work your way through that online training, the sort of the ultimate pinnacle is the UiPath certified professional, and that's someone that knows all elements of the software, knows how to apply it within the business context, and knows how to run it at scale. One of the things we didn't talk about is there's a component of the UiPath solution which is they call the orchestrator, and that's kind of the way you would manage a whole workforce of multiple robots across an enterprise, and so that's part of the curriculum as well.
So shifting over to personal productivity, you once mentioned to me that you have a approach that you referred to as the time cube. Talk to me about that a little bit.
Yeah, so I think like everybody, I find that concentrating on something without interruption is one of the tougher things in life these days, in particular when you want to be successful at work. So it's a very simple solution. I think I ordered it on Amazon for $6 or $7, but it's a little cube that sits on my desk, and it has increments from 5 minutes to 60 minutes, and you simply flip it to the amount of time that you want to concentrate on something, and a little buzzer goes off at the end of that period. And so one of the things that I try to do to maintain productivity is structure my day in a way where I've got specific objectives in mind, and then I allocate the time to be able to concentrate just on that without allowing the emails or the distracting things that pop up all over your computer these days to distract me. So it's sort of a commitment to myself that I'll spend those 30 or 60 minutes or 15 minutes or whatever working on that task.
Okay. Any books that you found particularly helpful that you'd like to recommend?
Yeah, one of the ones that I read earlier this year, actually before going down the independent route, was Hit Refresh by Satya Nadella, the new CEO of Microsoft. Mm-hmm. And obviously, coming from a technology background, Microsoft has been an organization that I've kept track of for quite a while. I think under Satya's leadership, they have drastically repositioned themselves in the market. They've challenged, if you will, some old sacred beliefs about their position in the marketplace, and their position, kind of in the technology ecosystem. And so they took a few decisions, which Satya personally championed, to become a much more open technology provider, where the concepts like open source and the like that have emerged in recent years, were almost completely against the Microsoft ethos for a while. Those kind of things are now embraced. He's done a number of other things, moving the entire focus of the organization to the cloud, and the Azure stack and the cloud services that Microsoft is providing has been a major shift in their focus. And you see the results have been nothing but positive in terms of how they've performed and how the market's reacted. So Satya's book is a very interesting reflection on how an organization challenges its beliefs and evolves with the changing environment. He also talks about his own personal life and how he's done that as an individual as well as a corporate leader. One of my old favorites, Will, is one called Parkinson's Law: The Pursuit of Progress. It's by C. Northcote Parkinson, and it's a quote that's been up on my wall for quite a while now. That came from there. It's called Parkinson's Law: is work expands so as to fill the time available for its completion. And so all along my career, I've been sort of a student of personal and organizational productivity and effectiveness, and that's one of the ones that's quite interesting. So in the book, and this comes from 1958, he examined the way bureaucracies tend to grow at a certain rate, and the incentives that individuals, particularly those in leadership position, have to grow their subordinates and the size of their organization, regardless of the volume of work that's being done or not. So it's an interesting one to think about in the context of what we speak about as the opportunity for robotics these days.
Yeah, and that kind of makes me think that if you're going to go through one of these exercises of instilling robots, putting them in place, you need to have a plan of what you want that person to do with the time that you free up, because the corollary of Parkinson's law is probably my ability to spend time reading the news or goofing off expands to fill the time available. So if we just free up all this time using robots, we want to make sure that we have new, more productive uses for people's time. So Kevin, this has been really a fantastic discussion. I learned so much about robotic process automation. I feel a lot smarter about it. Thank you very much for being on the show.
Thank you, Will, for having me. It's been a real pleasure and an honor.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Unleashed, the show that explores how to thrive as an independent professional. Unleashed is sponsored by Umbrex, the world's first global community of top-tier independent management consultants. The mission of Umbrex is to create opportunities for independent management consultants to meet, share lessons learned, and collaborate. I'd love to get your feedback and hear any questions that you'd like to see us answer on this show. You can email me at unleashed@umbrex.com. That's UMBREX.com. If you found anything on the show helpful, it would be a real gift if you would let a friend know about the show and take a minute to leave a review on iTunes, Google Play, or Stitcher. And if you subscribe, our show will get delivered to your device every Monday. Our audio engineer is Dave Nelson. Our theme song was composed by Gary Negbauer, and I'm your host, Will Bachman. Thanks for listening.